It's a quiet kind of suffering, the feeling that no matter what you do, it's never quite enough. You succeed, but the satisfaction dissolves too quickly. You're praised, yet something inside remains untouched, and so you keep moving, keep achieving, hoping that the next approval, the next nod of recognition might finally silence the doubt within. But it never does. It only deepens the silence, the strange emptiness that follows every applause. Nietzsche once said, "No one can build you the bridge on which you must cross the river of life. This is the bridge of self-validation, the passage from dependence to dignity, from borrowed worth to self-defined meaning." And though the crossing is lonely, it leads to something the modern world has nearly forgotten, a peace that does not need to be witnessed to be real. In this episode, we will walk through that journey, from the modern disease of approval to the quiet power of living beyond the need for praise. You will see why the craving for validation is not just emotional, but biological, how the mind can unlearn this addiction, and why solitude, far from being emptiness, is where self-belief is born. Stay until the end, because once you understand this, the applause will never have power over you again. There is a quiet epidemic that has nothing to do with viruses or contagion, yet it spreads faster than any disease in history. It's the need to be seen, not truly seen, but confirmed. Modern life, for all its progress, has turned validation into currency. People no longer ask, "Is this true?" but rather, "Will they like it?" The instinct to express has been replaced by the instinct to perform. Every thought is weighed against the invisible court of opinion, every action measured by its applause. And in this performance, truth quietly dies. Nietzsche once warned, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." He foresaw this age, an era where belonging would be mistaken for meaning, and agreement for truth. The herd does not demand understanding, it demands likeness. It wants you to echo its emotions, mirror its morals, and kneel before its collective comfort. In doing so, the individual dissolves. What remains is a chorus of agreeable shadows, each terrified of standing out. Psychology today mirrors this warning with eerie precision. Studies in neuroscience reveal that social approval activates the same reward centers in the brain as food and money. The nucleus accumbens lights up like a beacon whenever we are liked or affirmed. This means that validation is not merely emotional, it's biological. The modern self, bathed in this chemical approval, becomes addicted to recognition. The phone becomes a mirror, not of reflection but of dependence. But this addiction carries a silent cost. When your worth depends on how the world perceives you, your identity becomes fragile, shifting with every passing trend. The self, once an inner sanctuary, turns into a marketplace. You trade authenticity for acceptance, expression for conformity. What Nietzsche called slave morality takes form again, a morality that seeks safety over strength, belonging over becoming. You start to fear rejection more than falsehood, and slowly you begin to disappear in the applause you crave. The tragedy is that the world rewards this disappearance. Those who conform are celebrated as balanced, while those who question are dismissed as arrogant or difficult. Yet Nietzsche believed that only those who dare to offend the crowd can truly awaken their spirit. To validate oneself is to break the spell of the herd, to return to one's own instincts after years of betrayal. But that return is not easy. It requires courage, the kind that no audience will cheer for. For in a world where approval is everything, independence feels like exile. And so, the journey begins where all genuine strength begins, in the act of becoming the judge of your own worth. If this content is resonating with you, consider subscribing. I make videos that help you see the world and yourself more clearly. Thank you. There comes a moment, often quiet and unremarkable, when a person grows tired of waiting. Tired of waiting for praise that never comes, for permission that was never needed, for someone else to declare that their way of living is worthy. It is in that silence that self-validation begins, not as rebellion, but as reclamation. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are." A simple command, yet perhaps the most difficult one ever spoken. To become who you are means to withdraw your worth from the hands of the world and return it to your own. It is the slow, painstaking process of learning to trust the voice within over the applause without. Modern psychology calls this the development of an internal locus of control. It's the difference between living as a reaction and living as a cause. Those who possess it exhibit greater resilience, creativity, and emotional stability, not because they are unbothered by others, but because their self-concept is rooted in agency rather than approval. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-regulation and decision-making, strengthens as people learn to define their own standards. The brain literally reorganizes itself to sustain autonomy. In other words, independence is not only a moral act, it is a neurological one. But Nietzsche understood something science could only later confirm. This inner authority must be earned through suffering. To become the judge of your own worth, you must first confront the places where you've handed it away, the teachers whose praise you craved, the relationships where you bartered truth for peace, the jobs where you disguised potential beneath obedience. Every act of conformity leaves a residue, the memory of self-betrayal, and each must be faced if one wishes to be free. To judge yourself is not to condemn yourself, it is to weigh your actions against your own deepest values and to accept what you find without flinching. Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch was not a man of arrogance, but of authorship, one who creates meaning from within, who says, "I decide what is noble, what is right, what is mine." Such people do not wait for approval because they live in alignment with something more enduring than applause, conviction. And yet, to hold this conviction is to walk alone. The moment you cease to seek validation, the world grows quiet. Friends may drift, voices may fade, and the familiar warmth of belonging gives way to the cold air of solitude. But this silence is not punishment, it is purification. For what is loneliness, if not the clearing where the authentic self begins to speak? It is here, in the stillness after detachment, that the soul first hears its own power and begins the long and beautiful trial known as the loneliness of self-belief. There is a peculiar silence that follows the decision to live by one's own judgment. It is not the silence of peace, but of absence, the absence of noise, of validation, of the comforting hum of approval that once surrounded every choice. At first it feels like loss. The mind, long conditioned to seek external confirmation, interprets quiet as rejection. But this is merely the withdrawal of the crowd, not the loss of connection. It is the beginning of individuation, the sacred solitude Nietzsche called the crucible of the spirit. He wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." And chaos is precisely what this loneliness feels like. When the scaffolding of others' opinions collapses, what remains is the raw architecture of the self, uncertain, unfinished, but real. Modern neuroscience offers an unexpected parallel. In isolation, the brain's default mode network becomes more active, the same network associated with introspection, imagination, and self-referential thought. It's as though the mind, deprived of external noise, begins to reorganize around its own inner voice. Solitude, then, is not emptiness, it is integration. But few endure it long enough to see what it's building. Most retreat, mistaking stillness for failure, when in truth it is transformation. Nietzsche understood that self-belief demands exile before it grants freedom. The herd's warmth is traded for the cold light of self-awareness. And this cold light, though uncomfortable, reveals what no amount of praise ever could: that the power to affirm oneself, to say yes to one's path, even when no one else does, is the birth of authenticity. Those who have walked this path often describe it not as confidence, but as clarity, a kind of quiet strength that no longer depends on being understood. It's the moment when one realizes that truth need not be explained to be real. Psychological research has long shown that solitude increases what is known as self-concept clarity, the stability of one's sense of identity over time. When people stop negotiating their worth with others, they begin to anchor it in meaning. And meaning, unlike praise, does not fade. Yet this stage is perilous. The loneliness of self-belief can tempt even the strongest mind toward despair. There will be moments when the absence of validation feels unbearable, when doubt masquerades as reason, and the will begins to waver. Nietzsche's remedy was not comfort, but courage. To bear solitude, he believed, was to forge the soul capable of creation. For only the one who has stood alone can act from truth, not imitation. In time, this solitude becomes less like exile and more like ownership, the quiet knowing that your path, though misunderstood, is yours. And from that ownership comes a deeper peace, one untouched by the fickleness of applause. The journey does not end in loneliness, it ends in liberation, the serene strength of living beyond the need for praise. There is a rare kind of peace that arises when the applause fades and you realize you have not lost your worth with it. It is the quiet after the storm, the moment when the noise of the world withdraws and your voice no longer trembles in its absence. To live beyond the need for praise is not to become indifferent or cold. It is to rediscover the still center of your being, the place that acts not for recognition, but from necessity. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. The one who has found that why no longer needs witnesses to endure." In the language of modern psychology, this is the movement from extrinsic motivation to intrinsic drive, from reward to meaning. Studies show that people who pursue goals out of inner conviction rather than external reward experience longer-lasting satisfaction and lower anxiety. The dopamine spikes of approval are fleeting, but the steady hum of purpose endures. The brain, in its wisdom, begins to favor the long arc of fulfillment over the short thrill of recognition. This is not just philosophy, it's biology aligning with truth. Nietzsche believed that this alignment was the hallmark of maturity. When one ceases to measure value by how loudly others respond and begins to act from the whisper of conscience instead. Such a life is not loud, but luminous. It does not seek to impress, only to express what must be said, done, created. Praise becomes irrelevant not because it's rejected, but because it's transcended. The individual has become the source of their own affirmation. Yet this transcendence is not isolation. It deepens connection. For when you no longer need others to approve of you, you can finally meet them without the mask of performance. Conversations regain honesty, work regains soul, and love becomes devotion rather than transaction. What Nietzsche called the will to power is no longer domination. It's the power to live truthfully, without the hunger to be seen. And perhaps that is the quiet revolution this age needs, people who live not for applause, but for alignment. Those who can act without spectacle, believe without echo, and give without needing to be remembered. For the world does not need more noise, it needs integrity. If this reflection stirred something within you, a thought, a recognition, or perhaps a memory of your own forgotten strength, share it below. Words born from sincerity have a way of finding others who need them. Leave a like if this journey spoke to you, and let it continue its quiet work beyond this screen. For every act of reflection, every gesture of understanding contributes, in its own small but vital way, to the great work of living beyond the need for praise.